Right. So yeah, for the next 20 minutes, what I'm going to do is just step you through the mission and goals of the program, our key milestones, and then drill specifically into a bit more detail around the emissions reporting, farm planning, and emissions pricing aspects of the program. To start with, though, just who are we and where have we come from? So Waka is the primary sector climate action partnership. The concept of this partnership was an alternative pitched by the ag sector to a proposed interim step to farm level pricing of pricing emissions via the emissions trading scheme at the processor level. So that was a recommendation that came out of the interim committee and was consulted on by government as kind of one of two interim options. And this was one of those interim options that was ultimately agreed, and that's how we exist. So there's 13 partners that are part of this partnership. I won't read them out. You'll see them listed there. But basically, all the key players in the ag sector, and we're partnering with the Federation of Māori Authorities, and with the Ministry for the Environment and the Ministry for Primary Industries. I also note really importantly that we're supported by critical technical expertise in kind from Ag Research, Scion, Manaki Whenua, the Food Association, and both the NZAGRC and the PGGRC. And the key thing in this partnership is that all the partners have acknowledged that the agriculture sector has a role to play in New Zealand's response to climate change. And He Waka Kanoa, the whakatauki, yes, it's very very familiar, used quite a lot, but there was really strong agreement around the partnership that it was the right name, because we are all in this canoe together without exception is what it means. And the nature of the partnership brings together all those that have a stake in ag sector's response to climate change, and is all about everyone pulling in the same direction, and this really key recognition that we can't achieve our missions and our goals and our milestones if we're not all pulling in the same direction. So what is that mission? By 2025, the partnership will implement a framework, and that's a key word there, implement. So moving beyond the dialogue and the talk that has kind of predicated this the last 20 years on this, implement a framework that will reduce agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and build the sector's resilience to climate change. Some key parts to this is empowering farmers and growers to measure, manage and reduce on-farm emissions, recognise, maintain and increase integrated sequestration on farms, and adapt to our climate, which is already changing and will continue to change. And this is all in the context of, not at the expense of, sustainable food and fibre production and a competitive ag sector. Achieving this mission requires a shift from where we are now to where we want to be. So this is basically a change management program. And what we know from behaviour change experts in this field is that a successful change management program means core to it is supporting farmers to know their numbers. You can't manage what you don't measure. Having options and knowing what levers they can pull to influence those options, and having an incentive to take action. So when you wrap that together, you get this goal statement, which is that by 2025, all farms are including climate change mitigation and adaptation in their farm, business and environment plans. They're calculating their net greenhouse gas emissions, sources and sinks, and being incentivised to take action through a price on emissions. So an emissions price is part of the package, and recognising sinks and sources is also really important. So we've got some key milestones along the way towards that goal. On the farm planning side, the first milestone was to produce guidance for greenhouse gases and farm plans by the start of this year. We then have a target of 25% of farms, including greenhouse gases in their farm plans by start of next year, working towards 100% of farms with greenhouse gases in their farm plans by the start of 2025. On the emissions reporting side, we've got a couple of targets in there. Those first 2 bullet points, 25% of farmers knowing their greenhouse gas emissions numbers by end of this year, and building towards 100% of farmers knowing their greenhouse gas emissions numbers by the end of next year. It's an ambitious target. Those two are about building awareness. So quite different than this third milestone here, which is that a farm level accounting and emissions reporting system is in place by 2025. So that's a pricing system in place by 2025. There's a key waypoint on this third bullet point, which is that we as a program have to provide recommendations to the Ministers for Agriculture and Climate Change on an alternative emission pricing system to the emissions trading scheme by March next year. So that is a key date that we are working to as a program. The Climate Change Commission will be assessing our progress against these milestones in June next year. And if progress is deemed insufficient, then that alternative interim step of pricing emissions at the processor level can be switched on. So in addition to those kind of core elements of the program, there are some broader elements, and I'll just whistle through these pretty quickly. Māori agribusiness. So we do have a Māori agribusiness workstream that underpins the program. It's referred to as Tio Kaha, or it's called Tio Kaha, which refers to the bindings that hold together the Waka. And drawing on its network, Federation of Māori Authorities has convened Tio Kaha, and it brings together agricultural Māori agribusiness expertise at a governance level, a technical level, and a farm level to ensure that a Māori perspective is integrated throughout all the work of the program. You see integrated farm plans there. So we recognise that, climate change is just one of a number of things that a farmer is managing on farm. So an integrated farm plan approach is really important. And so looking at how our climate change module integrates with broader farm planning modules and working through MPI's integrated farm plan team is another key aspect of the program. Recognising carbon on farm, through He Waka Kinoa, we are doing work to understand how we can recognise the actions that farmers and growers have already taken to protect sequestration on their farms through their QE2 covenants, riparian planting, etc., and how we can encourage further sequestration as well. Increased farm advisory capacity and capability will be, we know there's a gap in what the support there is around farmers to advise, and it's both a gap in capacity and capability. And so the program has a role in supporting key, consistency of messages and, basic collateral. We won't necessarily set up new programs per se, but the partners are certainly looking at how they can build capacity in this area. Support for innovation and uptake. So an important principle of the program is that we're not going to duplicate work that's already underway. Where we have a value add in working in partnership is more in that coordination and alignment space. So in the context of innovation, we're bringing together all the key players in the innovation ecosystem and enabling better coordination between that innovation, idea development, mitigation, technology development, and linking it back to farm. So joining them with the extension and adoption experts. That's where we have value add in our program. And the last one there, recognising early adopters. So we're looking at how we can support early action on farm and recognise those that are already well on their way. So now I'm just going to drill in a bit on emissions reporting, farm planning and emissions pricing and give you a bit of an update on where we're at. And you remember back to those milestones, targets for 25% of farms knowing their numbers, 100% of farms knowing their numbers. Was a farm, we've defined it for the purposes of this program as being over 80 hectares, or a dairy has a dairy supply number, or as a feedlot. That gives us roughly 25,000 farms and covers about 97.3% of emissions. And it's a good balance between bang for buck. If we focus on those 25,000 farms, then we get most of the emissions in the agriculture sector, understanding what their numbers are. We looked at all the greenhouse gas calculators that are available on the market, ran them through an assessment against a very minimum set of specifications, and this was really just to rule out any snake oil salesmen and people taking farmers down a road of saying, boy, have we got the mitigation and the tool for you. So far we've assessed 10 calculators or models, and they're listed there. And yes, there is variation in the outputs of these tools. Our assessments are showing that. You guys probably all know that. Some of that's because some of the models are more complex, others are simpler, but it also is to do with some of the algorithms that sit behind there, how they're looking at metabolizable energy and the like. The decision was made in the context of building awareness that the best thing we can do is get farmers using the tools that they're already using and that are already out there. And that if a farmer uses a tool one year and that same tool another year, they can see how they're tracking, see what the change is, and figure out what levers they can pull to make that change. So in the context of awareness, that variation is very tolerable. It is something that people like to kind of point the finger at, but in terms of just getting on the journey, it's the right decision. However, when it comes to emissions pricing, you can't have that variability, and I'll come back to that point when I go into a little bit more detail around the pricing. So we're looking at it quite differently for pricing is the key message here. So where are we at? We actually are just about to do another round of updating numbers, but the numbers that I've got to hand so far is that 10,000 of those 25,000 farms know their numbers. Big push from the dairy sector through Dairy Tomorrow strategy, with farmers receiving greenhouse gas reports from their processors. Beef and lamb rolled out the greenhouse gas calculator in July, and that's getting a lot of good uptake as well. You've got Hort and Far also developing tools and rolling those out. Then on the farm planning side, we completed our guidance for farm plans, and that's available on our website if you're interested. Industry bodies are integrating that guidance into their existing farm plan programs, assurance plan programs. We've run a recognition and equivalence process for those programs, just so that we can say when we're counting those farm plans towards our milestones that they're credible, that people have included climate change in those farm plans. And this year we're updating the guidance to include adaptation, and I'll add there as well a bit more around how freshwater mitigations align or don't with the climate change mitigations that are set out in that guidance. So where are we at with that? Obviously farm planning a bit more involved, so the numbers aren't as far along as knowing your numbers, and again, these numbers will be updated shortly, but at last count, 1,600 of 25,000 with greenhouse gases in their farm plans. Beef and lamb pushing their climate change module out alongside their calculator, and you've got the likes of Fonterra's Tiaki and other farm plan programs building that climate change module, or built that climate change module in, and are pushing that out now. So I'll just end with a little bit of an insight into the emissions pricing work that we're doing. The overarching objective of this is to design a pricing system that is part of a broader behaviour change framework. And the key point here is that pricing on its own is not going to deliver on our mission. It is got to be part of a system, and part of that system is the farm planning and the extension that's wrapped around. And there are other parts to that system as well. You know, the incentives that they will get from the market, the incentives they'll get from their processors. So a pricing system is one player amongst many different influences. What are we trying to do? We're trying to incentivize farmers and growers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase sequestration. We're trying to contribute towards our greenhouse gas emissions targets, and we're trying to support a productive and competitive agriculture sector. Some other core criteria or that the system needs to be workable, needs to be practical, implementable, needs to align with other government and industry objectives, and it needs to be equitable. The challenge here is that everyone has a different idea of what that is. And of course, it needs to be consistent with Crown's Treaty of Waitangi obligations. So some key questions that we're exploring through our the collaborative design of this emissions pricing policy is how will the different agricultural gases be treated? As I'm sure you're all very familiar, the different gases have different characteristics. So we're looking at how those characteristics will be reflected through an emissions pricing system. You know, and a different price for your long-lived gases versus your short-lived gases. A key point of the program is how can you recognise and reward early adopters? So it is really important that we don't set up a system that you know, encourages people to load their farms up before the system takes place, i.e., anything that any sort of grandparenting. So that's a very key principle in the program. And another key question that we're landing is this: how do you estimate and report emissions? And this goes back to the point where I said earlier, where we've got, you know, these 10 tools that we've assessed as good for supporting farmers to know their numbers and build awareness around climate change. But when it comes to emissions pricing, you need one method to rule them all. You can't have that variability. So we're looking at how can you build in a bit of flexibility for farmers in that? How can you actually connect to those existing tools whilst having a single method, that a consistent way of calculating emissions in the scheme? A really important part of the program is how will on-farm sequestration be recognised. So we are looking at how you can include in the pricing system sequestration that doesn't meet the definition of forest in the ETS. So this includes sequestration associated with pre-1990 forests, includes riparians, and all the bits that don't currently meet the definition of forest in the ETS. There's a real challenge here between making that pragmatic and implementable, and making sure that we are doing a good job of recognising both sources and sinks in the scheme. Another question, can farmers form groups or clubs? So we're looking at how we can enable that, so that people can group together by catchments or other logical groupings, iwi hapu whānau. Considerations for setting a price on emissions. So how you set the price, do you link it to the ETS? That might be appropriate for long-lived gases, but not for short. And how would you change that over time? Who's involved in advising on that? How revenue generated should be used. So obviously a pricing mechanism, a farmer has a choice of reducing their emissions, increasing sequestration, or paying the levy. How should that revenue be used and can be reinvested in the sector? What should it be reinvested into? And lastly, how do we recognise the unique characteristics of Māori land, Māori agribusiness, and Mātauranga Māori and Tikanga Māori? So where are we at? We've got a short list of policy options to price emissions and incentivise on-farm sequestration. There is still a lot of active work going on to get a clear understanding of the design options and their pros and cons. We regularly test our analysis as we go with a tight farmer reference group, which has got a couple of representatives from across the different partner organisations or representing their sectors. But what we are building towards is engaging in a lot more detail on the policy design with farmers and wider stakeholders in November this year. So you'll start to hear a lot more about that engagement directly from our partners shortly. COVID's obviously a bit of a spanner in the works, and we're just keeping an eye on what that means for that November engagement. So in summary, this is an important one for the sustainability and the strength of our sector. the milestones that I've set out, they are ambitious, but we're actually tracking very well towards them. I mean, that 100% of all farms knowing their greenhouse gas numbers, that's going to be a push, but the partners are very committed to it and looking at very innovative ways to try to deliver on that milestone. So I hope that through this presentation you can see that we are making really strong progress, and maybe more importantly that you can see on the ground, that you're sensing on the ground the shift in activity around greenhouse gas and the increasing in awareness for farmers around this. So that's me. I will cancel out of that.